name is Siobhan Sutherland Rogers. I am the interim CEO of AITD, and I'd just like to take you through a number of housekeeping rules to make sure this event is seamless, highly interactive, and of course, utterly enjoyable. Firstly, you won't be able to be seen during the presentation, so if you wish to ask your presenter a question, please use that chat facility located at the bottom of the left-hand corner of your screen. I can see that some of you, hi there, Kerry, Lynelle, and a couple of other people are already saying hi, how are you going? John, Sherry, Michelle, Joan, hello there. The other thing is today's event will be recorded and you will be sent a copy of the recording, the PowerPoint slides and any supporting documentation within the next 48 hours. Also, of course, we'll be loading this up onto our AITD website, aitd.com.au. Just a couple of things before we start. So we've talked about the posting a comment, but also I've got my wonderful staff member, Patrick, who is looking after the Twitter account. So that's hashtag AITD webinar. Please join in. Remember that we would love to hear about your tips, any documentations, anything that you'd like to share. Please use the chat box and the webinar. That would be great. I believe that we will be doing answering questions at the end with Arun. So obviously prepare your questions and I would suggest you type them in now. So let me introduce our amazing presenter, Arun Pradhan, who I met, well, back in 2016. Oh, God, it was a long time ago. He is the founder of Learn to Learn app. He's an experienced blended learning performance specialist who has taken the creative lead on performance-based projects for some of Australia's largest companies. He, in fact, was the winner last year of the AITD Learning and Development Professional of the Year and the Australian E-Learning Industry Association Award for Individual Excellence 2015. Arun, in fact, has been internationally recognised for his ongoing contribution to the learning industry. He's particularly acknowledged for his design thinking with performance consulting techniques to help foster change in projects collectively spanning hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, if you've been in one of those workshops, you will know how amazing they are. He is constantly researching evidence-based techniques inspired by cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, marketing and other domains, and is adept at translating these findings into practical and contextualized performance solutions. It was amazing to be, it was a great privilege, in fact, to be party to the AITD conference and to hear Arun's update on design thinking and agile learning. And in addition to that, he specializes in strategies to develop, as I say, learning agility in individuals and organizations. And he's recently launched his own app on this topic entitled Learn to Learn. I'll now hand over to Arun. Welcome, Arun.
Thank you. That was a very generous and intimidating introduction. I feel like the only way is down now. But I'll keep writing. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone, for your participation in today. I know it's a busy time for everybody. Probably just hopefully you're grabbing some lunch as you're listening. I'm going to very briefly go through future of work, which is the context of where we're sitting in terms of our emerging skills that we need to focus on, or that I believe that we need to focus on. But I'm going to jump right in. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about this because I want to get into the actual skills. But just as a context, and some of you may have heard me talking about this, I've really identified 4 key areas that I believe that are key trends in the future of work that we can see. The rise of digital and data is an obvious one. And the data in particular, the rise of digital means that data is actually coming from everywhere because everything we do now has some sort of digital footprint. And every time we have a digital footprint, there's data associated with that. So it's really a bit of a game changer in terms of being able to track and measure and have metrics on a range of things that we couldn't before, which is both amazing opportunities and incredibly creepy. Then there's a rise of personalised experiences, that this idea that people no longer are able to just accept an event or a product, and yet they actually, or we actually expect the whole end-to-end experience to work well. The rise of human skills in that context, the rise of people needing to connect, to communicate, to have those, whether you call them soft skills, permanent skills, employability skills, whatever you want to call them. Most people know them as soft skills, but they are so much more. I like to talk about them as human skills, the real need for those. And then the rise of agility. And by agility, I don't just mean speed, I mean things that are actually changing constantly. That change is the new normal. And in that context, this is my kind of guiding light that I've been using for a few years now in terms of the skills that we need to, or what I call, survive a robot apocalypse. And it's really about embracing our humanity. And this isn't just for L&D. I believe that this is what I use in a range of contexts and a range of jobs. And look, you can go to the Future of Work, the World Economic Forum website, and see the top 20 list. McKinsey have got their version. This is just my sort of summarized version, because I found like 20 was too many for my brain to handle. So in the middle there, you can see that there's actually, in the middle area, that's the sort of more human skills, which are empathy is one of the key ones, collaboration and problem solving. And then that's all got the context of digital literacy and fluency, which I've already talked about. And encompassing all of that is the ability to learn and unlearn. And that's really necessary these days because of the nature of change. We need to reinvent ourselves constantly. So what does that mean? If you take that as the premise, what does that mean for L&D? And I believe there are 4 key L&D strategies that we can look at. Firstly, it's solving performance challenges. Then it's creating experiences and campaigns, enabling a culture of continuous learning, and then all that is wrapped up in this idea of measuring, identifying, and recognizing. Now, I'm going to go through each of them in a bit more detail. So firstly, solving performance challenges. For us, I guess one of the big challenges is that L&D are often put in a position where we're seen as order takers. That we can't, has this been your experience where in your daily work, are you just given, someone comes in and basically says, this is what we need, this is how we need it, like we need the e-learning module. You can actually choose a bit of the content, but really you're fixed in. Is that people's experience? I'd love for you to, don't just wait for the end, do like comment in the chat box if something's resonating or not resonating. But like, yeah, it'd be great if you could give me some feedback, is like how many people are actually just stuck with that sort of order taker kind of situation. So I think, I'm not sure if you can hear meowing in the background. We've just got a kitten, and this is one of the problems of actually doing it in my house, is that I've got a kitten trying to get into the back door. That sounds like, yep, a lot of order taker situations over there. So one of our challenges is that we are trying to reframe that order taker request. We're trying to uncover underlying issues, and we're trying to explore performance solutions. So this is a bit of a situation that I think is very common. One of the ways that we need to shift this is actually through a performance gap analysis process. Many of you have probably got some form of this, and I've developed a particular method. Some of the things I draw on design thinking. Kathy Moore's action mapping. Kathy Moore's action mapping is particularly good for people who are looking at an e-learning kind of environment, but it's good more broadly. And Nigel Harrison's performance consulting book is one of the classics, I think, in that space. My process, really, it's familiar for anyone who's involved in any of those areas. It starts with inviting the stakeholder, and that's a crucial point. Like when someone comes in and says, my classic thing is when someone comes in and drops a PowerPoint on the table and says, oh, so we need this turned into an e-learning module. My big recommendation for people I work with, for learning designers I work with, is do not make eye contact with the PowerPoint. As soon as you make eye contact with a PowerPoint, you're just sort of sucked into that vortex of talking about content, and you don't want to talk about content. You want to actually lift their horizon to talk about performance. So one of the things that you're doing with an invitation is saying, oh, it's great, you know, you take the PowerPoint, you don't make them wrong, but you basically say, it's fantastic you've got this information prepared for me, and what I would really like to do in the next, assuming you've got 30 minutes, what I'd really like to do in the next 30 minutes is have a conversation about what your real needs are behind this, so I can really understand how to actually make the biggest impact for you. So you make it about you, you don't make it about them. You basically are saying that that's great, take the content, and that you can, if they give you half an hour, you can actually come up with some, you can actually get the information you need to have a bigger impact, basically. One of the biggest steps in this is defining performance goals. So most people, when they come into you, most stakeholders will actually say, well, my salespeople need to learn blah, 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 or the executives need to know blah, blah, blah. And they start off with learning objectives. Now, with performance goals, I feel like they're sort of in the middle. Up the top here is, I'm really writing messily with this mouse, but you get the idea. But above performance goals are business objectives, and below them are learning objectives. And that is meant to say learning. I normally write really messily on purpose because I'm a terrible speller, but that time I was actually trying to be neat. So most people come in with a learning objective. People need to know, people need to understand, people need to learn, blah. You do not want to stay at that level. The point is you're trying to get a performance goal out of them. What do people actually need to do, or what do people need to achieve in their job that's different to now? That's what you're trying to focus in on. But the way you get there is to start with business goals. You're basically saying, what is important to the business? So one of the ways I'm going to dwell on this bit a bit because I think it's a crucial step. One of the things I ask people when they come in is basically say, well, okay, in 6 months' time, when we're successful with this project and you bump into your CEO or your boss's boss in the lift, what will you say was achieved? And you've only got, it's only a lift conversation. Basically, what are you going to say was the most important thing that this project achieved? And as soon as you say that, you start getting a business version of why this is important. The CEO doesn't necessarily care that the salespeople understand how to close or understand about this product. They care if they actually are selling this product to this new segment, for example. That's what, and that the percentage of sales has gone up for this new segment or whatever. So that's where you identify the business goals. One of the ways you get there is when they start with a learning goal, one of the things I get sick of saying, and people must get sick of hearing me, is I say, and what would that give you? So if someone says, people need to learn blah, people need to understand blah, I say, and what would that give you? And that helps go up this scale through performance and business goals. But really the focus is on getting that performance goal of working out what people actually need to achieve in their work. It's not what they need to know, that's jumping ahead. So I think I've stressed that enough. Beyond that, it's identifying who's involved. I use personas to try to get a point of empathy in terms of what's current state at the moment, like understanding people in their current state right now. So rather than just having this like ambiguous or anonymous person, I try to get quite personal. Then identify what behavior change. What behavior change does this person, does this particular persona need to make to hit that performance goal? And behavior change is stuff that you can see. You know, it's often saying, if you were there observing, what actions would you see them taking? Then finally, I go through, with each behavior change, I look at, is it a knowledge block? Is it skills? Is it motivation and mindset? Or is it environment? You may have come across that KSME model. It's worth Googling if you haven't. But I use that model to say, is it about knowledge, it's information? Is it about skills, something they need to practice? Is it about mindset and motivation, that they know the information, they know how to do it, but they don't care? Or is it the environment? And finally, at the very end is coming up with solutions. So this solution bit is way down the bottom. This is all this other stuff that I've been scribbling over is the crucial stuff up front. So that's where we need to like really get better. And the solution stuff, once you actually ask the right question, learning is only one small part of this picture. It's really about, there's so much more there except learning. Like it could be about feedback, or it could be about the teams, or it could be about leadership. There's so much other stuff there. So our propensity to jump to learning as the solution has to shift. And I think that's all about asking that right question up front. So in terms of skills there, I've given you a bit of a taster around performance consulting. There's a lot more to it, obviously. Whoa, I don't know what happened my pen just then. Did something weird happen? Okay, I'm just going to go with that. I don't know how to use this pen properly. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. That was totally on purpose, just to grab your attention and to break up the webinar. Did it work? So anyway, it's about performance consulting, design thinking skills, and building out data literacy and analytics. And I haven't mentioned much about that because I'm going to mention it later, but it's really about having some metrics around what's actually working. So you're not just going off the Ouija board and working out, is this working or is it not? So that's that first one. Once you come up with that, what the problem really is, rather than just shipping out courses, which is usually our trade, people talk about order taker. I think we are really gift wrappers, because they give us content and we have to wrap it up neatly and ship it out again. We have to wrap it up neatly in a workshop or in an e-learning module, and we might make a particularly interactive e-learning module. We might even check in gamification, but it's still ultimately just wrapping stuff. So instead, what we're trying to do is designing experiences and campaigns, and that's really about designing ecosystems. And this is a model I came up with a while ago. You can see a reference if you want to read a bit more about it down the bottom here. And when you're designing ecosystems, for me, it's really useful to think in terms of what resources am I providing, what environment factors am I providing, and how am I supporting these people with other people. So if someone needs to get something done and you've identified what the performance goal is, not the learning goal, you've identified what this person needs to get done in their job that's different to today. That's the performance challenge that we're trying to support with. So what resources can we provide them? There's obviously courses, but as you can see, courses is very removed from work. The best, it varies, but the best way to start thinking about it is what job aids and learning resources can I provide? And that's where micro-learning comes in a lot too, because it's this idea that rather than leaving your workflow and going and studying, it's actually what can be consumed in the context of your workflow. So the closer to actually, how can you embed resources in the workflow and actually make it so easy for people? I often think of Google, like when you're trying to get something done and you Google it, obviously you're going to Google it. You're not going to go to a course for a start, right? You start by Googling it. If you had to wait more than, say, 6 or 8 seconds for Google to respond, you'd probably get Google rage and throw something and at least go somewhere else, or maybe ask the person next to you or do something else instead. Yeah. So we have to think the same way. When someone needs to get something done in that moment of need, as a just-in-time tool, we've pretty much got about 5 to 8 seconds to get it to them. And that means we really need to understand their workflow. We need to understand their ecosystem in terms of what tools they're using and have the things there ready for them at that moment of need. That's quite a challenge for us. Similarly, this idea of people, I like Ross Dawson, I think it was, he talks about creating serendipity. And so the idea is that in a moment of need, how can you actually have the right people there so the person who's actually trying to do whatever they're trying to do in their job has the right access to the right mentor, has access to someone else who's tried this before, or can actually refer to their coach and so on. And I think a huge thing for me, a big emerging element for me, it's always been there, is project teams. For me, at the moment, people talk about development and they think, well, what course am I going to go do? Am I going to go do an MBA or whatever, you know? I think in the future, it's all going to be about project teams rather than think about doing a big course to actually improve or develop. You basically think of, I want to be working with those 5 people and I want to be working on this sort of project because that's going to get me where I want to go in a development kind of idea. So I feel like project teams are the new courses, particularly as things become more fluid in terms of organisational structures breaking down and the gig economy working out. You're going to be almost like on the market to join project teams, and you're going to be looking at who else is on it and what's their aim and whether you can actually develop the way you want to develop on them. And then environment is that third area, and particularly I guess I draw attention to systems and processes, which is an area that we really need to focus on. Peter Senge talks a lot about system thinking, and there's a lot of information out there about system thinking, but rather than seeing things as isolated parts, to really start seeing it as how everything influences each other in the organism that is a corporation or in a business, and seeing how we can just nudge one element to actually impact another area. It's a whole skill and it's a whole mindset that we need to develop as well. One way that we can do this is using co-design in particular, because it's really hard to hold all this in your head. So using co-design, and particularly using personas and journey maps, and there's other elements of design thinking that can do that with. You can do that with. I actually produced a video on it a couple of years ago, and you can Google this design thinking for learning innovation. This article has a video in it, which actually, it's a bit old now, and I've probably updated parts of it, but essentially I used a similar approach where it actually goes through a design thinking approach for to try to design an ecosystem and work out. Because to design an effective ecosystem, you really have to understand the people you're designing for, and you have to understand what they're doing now. This whole idea that you build it and they come is a lie, and it's really about understanding what they're doing, understanding what their habits are, and how you can nudge that or provide things for them at the right time in the areas that they're working in right now. So are your people using Confluence? Are they using SharePoint? You know, forget about trying to get them to the LMS if they're not going to the LMS. Where are they now, and how can you actually provide stuff to them where they're at, rather than trying to change another behaviour so you can change the ultimate behaviour, you know? So some skills here that have come up. Facilitating social learning we've known for a long time has been important, but you particularly, hopefully that came out, that this idea of being a facilitator of making teams work effectively and allowing teams to learn from each other, to connect people. CEB, who are now being bought out by Gartner, did some interesting research about managers recently. If you Google CEB connected managers, you see their research where they talk about who are the most effective managers. And it wasn't the sort of cheerleader or the teacher or the coach. It was actually the manager who actually effectively linked their people together and linked people with other people who had the appropriate skills to support them. And I think we can learn a lot from that research as well, that to see ourselves as connectors, where we're actually just literally facilitating connections between people and allowing them to work out loud and have those connections more effectively. And part of that is enabling knowledge and management and sharing in that work out loud culture. Part of this is actually marketing, because we're changing behaviour, and we're changing behaviour that was ingrained in school, that people are very formalised in their approach. And so partly I think it is about running campaigns. And elsewhere I've written about City's campaign around continuous learning, but I won't go into that now. Keep going. The third area is enabling a culture of continuous learning, and this is probably one that's really dear to my heart, which I'm spending a lot of time on. And for me, it's about understanding that life today is really about change, and change under the fourth industrial revolution is intensifying, it's accelerating. And so what are our responses to change? That we really, everyone really in a work environment has to learn how to either navigate through change, to innovate, so they can actually create and drive change. And the most fun one, but also the most potentially stressful one, is how can we develop and adapt and reinvent ourselves to embody change? And I think that's the biggie, is like, how can we support people to actually reinvent themselves? It's not just about giving them the next technical course, it's about helping them develop so they can survive in this context. And, you know, as I keep talking about surviving the robot apocalypse, the ways you're going to do that are by increasing complex soft skills. So it's no longer enough just to do those automated tasks, really basic tasks, because they're going to get gobbled up by automation and robots and machines, right? So these days, we've got to be more human. We've got to have greater communication skills, greater empathy, and all those things are really complex and soft skills. The other part is actually giving people the confidence that they can do this. So it's actually supporting them to actually develop a growth mindset and enable curiosity and encourage curiosity. And the third area in terms of development is high order thinking. So it's not enough just to be rote learners who just remember it and understand basic information. We've got to be agile problem solvers who can think critically and come up with solutions on the fly and apply concepts in new areas. So that's really about higher order thinking. And every role has got to move up that scale, or it's going to get automated, basically. Meanwhile, how can we augment them? So automation and robots aren't just a threat, they're actually an enabler too. So with the rise of AI, chatbots and all these other things, how can we actually support people so they can actually focus on these development areas? What can be automated? What do they want to be automated? what boring tasks do you want to actually automate? I'm sure everyone here has got something in your job in the next week that you would love if a robot did for you. And if that robot did do that for you, what opportunities would that give you in terms of developing yourself more as a human, rather than just doing the receipts or doing the Excel spreadsheet stuff that you need to do? And similarly, how can we augment people through developing their networks and not only allowing them to understand the importance of know-who, but actually getting rid of the barriers so they can actually connect with people in their organization and in their industry and in other industries more effectively. And that's what I keep pointing to, is that L&D as a facilitator, as a connector, is becoming more and more of a thing, I think. So I've got this, which I'm not going to go into in any great detail, but I think the slides are available to you. I'm also writing a lot about this so I'm writing in Learning Solutions magazine a series around learning agility. So you can Google around that, because I've talked about a fair bit about this in that magazine. But these are the different elements that we have to pay attention to actually enable learning agility in an organization. And L&D, I think, has got a major role in trying to make all this happening. The good thing is that we're not doing this alone. But what I've really learned over the last period is I talk about having to augment ourselves with people. We actually have to extend our networks to actually work with different areas of the business that we weren't doing before. I mean, everyone did it to a certain extent, but when you start from a performance consulting point of view, and you come to a point where you realize, well, this is actually about IT systems and actually about recruitment, and it's out of my scope. Suddenly, it's all about the relationships you've got with those people to be able to make an influence on that performance solution, because you're actually reaching out to people who are outside of your domain, say, hey, this is what I've uncovered. How about, can we work on this together? Would you like to be part of the co-design process where we can come up with solutions with this? And trying to get executive stakeholders on board with that as well. So it's not just you working in your silo, you're actually going to be that change maker who actually has tentacles and influence across the business, both up and across. So it's quite a different role, rather than us just doing our courses in a corner. It's actually much more in terms of extending that influence. These are some tips that I've got, which I'm not going to go through, and you can read yourselves. Some key tips in terms of supporting organisational learning. But I'm going to keep going. I'm pretty sure this was meant to finish at 15 past, so I know Amelia had to go, but I'm hoping that this is I'm on the right track with time. So some key skills to enable continuous learning. They're very similar to some of the other ones. I think the design thinking and co-design are still coming in here. I think one of the different ones here is this idea of engaging and activating leaders. One of the tips I had on the previous page was, how can we, for example, how can we get leaders to tell their learning stories? How have they overcome failure, and how have they actually adopted failure as part of their learning, for example? Getting them to tell their stories and actually spreading that, and also getting them to see the value of those sorts of initiatives, is one of the key challenges for us. I mean, some CEOs, like, in Microsoft and other companies, there are examples of CEOs who get it, who are actually like leading the charge on learning and learning agility, or whatever you want to call it, continuous learning. But for other people in other organizations, I guess the question is, how can you actually use that sort of social proof and use that sort of influence that you've got to actually say that this is crucial, and you can play a key role in making this happen. So it's really reframing. I'm not just here to create new courses. I'm actually here to actually future-proof this business by helping develop learning agility. That's almost like the pitch for your new role. Finally, measuring and identifying and recognizing. This might be familiar. Tell me if it's familiar. Thanks, Lionel, for the confirmation. That's 11:15. So this one, fantastic news. E-learning completion is way up. Our latest workshops are getting brilliant feedback, and they've got the L&D report, and they're all happy. And meanwhile, the reality check is like not even there. And that's kind of, I did this before because I was so frustrated that L&D, we've managed to create metrics which only we care about. Because they're easier to measure, it's too hard to, fourth level Kirkpatrick's is way too hard. So instead we basically do knowledge checks, and we check to see if people have memorized what we've just been talking about a little while ago, or whether what sort of emotional response they had to it. But there's no impact on performance. And therefore, we've actually, by focusing on that, I'm often reminded of the Soviet factory. There's a story, and apparently I made the mistake of actually researching and found out it wasn't quite true, but it's a good story anyway. But there was a myth about a Soviet factory who had a massive target to produce kids shoes, and they had to produce like 10,000 shoes. And so the way they did that was to produce just a left-footed shoe, because all their metric was to produce shoes. They didn't care about performance. And I feel like we're caught in that same bind, that we focus on our little metrics that we can measure as opposed to connecting with the business. And I think everyone on this call would be aware of that challenge, but I think it's worthwhile keeping it in mind. XAPI is a really great way that we can start to stretch into this. XAPI, you've probably come across, it's basically a data standard which basically has, actor, verb, object. So that's the structure. It's an actor, verb, object. So, for example, Wendy as the actor, excuse me for mentioning you, Wendy, verb, participated in, listened to, communicated on, chatted on, or whatever the verb is, the webinar. So that's the base statement. So the idea is that you can actually capture experiences beyond just formal learning, basically, and you can capture them. However, saying that, I feel like XAPI in Australia in particular is still at its very early stages. There's sort of 4 levels or 3 levels plus 0. The first is developing a data mindset, which everyone can do now. Even if you don't have capability to actually use XAPI, you can start thinking in terms of data. And I'll give you one tip on how to do that in a moment. The next is SCORM Plus. So beyond SCORM, how can you actually track e-learning in a more complex way? And that's a good start. And that's certainly, frankly, that's where I've been playing. A lot of the jobs I've been doing using XAPI tend to be, well, this is a bit better than SCORM, but it doesn't feel quite like we're reaching the potential. The next is tracking holistic learning. So rather than just formal learning, it might be tracking someone who's actually had a mentoring conversation, where a coach actually puts in a bit of a reporting after a coaching session, or in an informal discussion, it could actually track how you're actually communicating on a discussion forum, for example. So it's actually trying to get data inputs beyond just the e-learning module or just turning up to a workshop. But this is the gold mine. This is the one that's really crucial, is how can we connect learning and performance? So basically, what's the relationship between learning? So if you've got a high performer, what learning experiences have they had, and how have we rated them as a high performer, and can we see patterns, and can we share that as well? So yeah, XAPI, you don't create it; it's just a data standard. It is different to SCORM. It's kind of it can exist with SCORM, or it can sort of substitute a bit for SCORM, but it's kind of a bit beyond that. Probably don't have time to go too much into it right now, but it's definitely worth. I think there's actually another webinar coming up around data from AITD. I'm not sure if XAPI is part of that, but there's a lot online as well that you can. Megan Torrance is a great person to go to as a starting point. If you want to Google Megan Torrance and XAPI, I find that she's one of the ones that explains it the best. There's also Aaron Silvers is a good person to go to as well. One of my things to say in terms of getting a data mindset is next time you've got a performance challenge and people have said these salespeople need to do this or this needs to happen, what's the magic dashboard you would create? If you could put a dashboard in front of those people which would give them live feedback about something they're doing. It might be for a manager. It might be live feedback for what their people actually think about their values. It might be about feedback about the impact after a feedback session they gave. What would be the performance data that you would magically snap your fingers and it would be in front of them? Even thinking in terms of what metrics you would show that person to make a difference is starting to develop a data mindset. So start thinking in terms of what magic dashboard. Another way you can pose this is, what magic dashboard would my CEO throw $30,000 at without even thinking? Yes, as soon as I show them a sketch of this dashboard and say, this is how it's going to impact performance and meet your outcome, the CEO is going to say, of course, have this money. Then you know you're on track for a business relevant dashboard. The next step is talking to vendors or talking to internal teams about how you can create that dashboard. But from your point of view, you need to understand as a learning designer, what information what metrics you would have, and then you can go find out if that's possible. So think about the magic dashboard. There's some key skills there around measuring, identifying, recognizing. So key takeaways, and I'm bringing it home now. I guess for me, it's about keeping this in mind as the 4 areas: solving performance challenges, creating experiences and campaigns, and that's really about designing ecosystems where those experiences happen in, enabling a culture of continuous learning, which for me, the terms I use are really about developing learning agility and innovation, which is obviously what I've spent a lot of my time doing. And then wrapping that up in measuring, identifying, recognizing, and particularly looking at XAPI and data. If I just summarize it in 3 skills, and hopefully these have come out through the presentation, it's about learning agility, which obviously is this idea of you as an individual. How can you reinvent yourself? How can you show that level of learning agility? How can you actually take something from marketing or take something from behavioral economics or take these other ideas and bring that to your practice to reinvent yourself and to really generate that continual level of reinvention and evolution. So that's the first one. Data analytics, I think I've touched on, and I think this idea of that you've got to actually think in terms of what metrics that I would have here today can actually not only prove that this was successful, but can actually impact and predict performance as well. So it's about being predictive. It's not just analysing it post something as well. And to do all that, one of the ways you're going to do it is using co-design and design thinking. And I would really refer you to that link I gave. And there's great, Sharon Bowler from Bottom Line Performance in America is also doing some great work around design thinking as well in the L&D space. So I think that they're the sort of 3 key skills that I'd end on. And that's me. So you can check out my website and definitely check out Learn to Learn because it's ready to demo in the next week. So if you want pricing and to demo it, let me know. But thank you, everybody. I'll pass back for any final questions before we finish. Or
all right, Arun, thank you so much. Before we go to the chat box, I would suggest, yep, that's great. You're sending your questions through, and Arun, you can have a look at the questions as they come through. Just to remind you that we do in fact have our magazine has gone out to all our subscribers this week, Learning Technology, and that also includes New Zealand. You should be getting your magazine this week and next week. If you'd like, and you haven't received the magazine, you can become a subscriber if you're not a member, and all you have to do is to go to the website, aitd.com.au, and it's on the home page if you put your email in. I'd also like to just remind people that if you would like to write for the magazine, please contact us. Our next magazine is due out in September, and that's all about stand and deliver, so facilitation, etc. We do have a number of meetups coming up. There's one in Canberra, in fact that's next week, in the morning. Then we have this amazing one with the Australian Navy. Did you know that the largest RTO in Australia is in fact the Australian Navy? I hadn't known that. I would suggest you would register now for that because there's only 36 places, and I know that they're going fast. You'll be met at Circular Quay on the evening on the 11th of July and taken by special boat to Garden Island and taken through a range of blended learning techniques and simulators at the Navy base. It's going to be absolutely fascinating, and we're very privileged and thankful that Australian Navy has allowed us access. And then, of course, we have a World Cafe at Adelaide, the wonderful Adelaide, about learning technologies on the 26th of July. I believe there should be yes, look, wonderful segue. Thank you, Arun. Data analytics, indeed, for learning professionals by Lisa Elias. That's, in fact, our next webinar, which is on the 27th of July. We also are actually launching our training workshops on that data analytics as a follow-up from the pre-conference workshop that was exceptionally successful. It is definitely something that learning professionals need to get a handle on. I have a range of conversations daily about this area, about how learning needs to really kind of have that analytics, so you can really kind of, when you get to the C-suite, you have a conversation about business performance, and not, as Arun says, about simply, the evaluation sheets, level 1 Kirkpatrick and happy sheets, because it really doesn't, on the whole, ring very relevant to the C-suite and in terms of getting budget. So there is a whole host of training, in-house training coming up between June and July. If you want any further information, please email learn@AITD. We will go to the question session now with Arun. While we wait, I believe there is a in-room survey pop-up on the right-hand side of your screen. Please ensure you hit the orange submit button so you can complete the questions, and we'll go from there. Arun, I, for one, you mentioned the KSM model. Can you remind us what each of those that acronym stood for and how you use it?
So basically with any behaviour change, once you identify a persona and basically work out behaviours that they need to take, so say, for example, a manager, the behaviour you're trying to get them to take is, for example, to have difficult conversations with their staff, for example. That's one of the things that you've assessed in the performance consulting situation. The next thing is to work out, is the block, so I use blocks, but if it's a positive psychology organisation, I use levers for change because they don't like blocks. But blocks people get. So I talk about, it's either knowledge, skills, motivation, mindset, or environment. So basically, if it's about difficult conversations, is it that you can just tell a manager, just give them the information, well, actually, you need to have this difficult conversation, you might need to ask these questions, and I say, oh, yes, fine, okay, I'll go do it, done. Or you can tell them, but they don't have the skills to do it. Skills are usually something you need to practice, so it's not just a matter of giving someone information, it's giving them information, and then they've actually got to do it a few times before they get it. And so that's a skill. But they might have the knowledge and they might have the skills, but they might not care. They might be one of those managers who think, well, I worked it out by myself. Why should I have to, why can't I treat these people like adults? That's a mindset issue. They might have the knowledge, they might have the skills, but it might go unpassed because they don't have the motivational mindset. Or they might have all those three things and the environment might not support that, because the environment might be highly, there might be a lot of litigation, and managers might be scared of talking, or there might not be the time because managers are too reactive and panicked and elsewhere. So that's an environmental factor. Environmental factors are often out of scope, but I've found in a performance consulting context, if we actually start raising them, then we can start developing a better partnership. And the one thing I've found is doing this process is that probably half the jobs start off being about knowledge and they end up being about mindset and motivation, which is where I've had to go and focus a lot more development around marketing and campaigning and using personas to really get that with them, what's in it for me factor, to really understand the people a bit more so I can speak to that.
Thanks, Arun. We do have a question from Tash. That is really about clarification on how do you create an API. Is it a different program to those created in SCORM?
Yeah, so I think I tried to address that at the time. I think it's more about you're generating statements. You've got to use a learning record store, so it's a different kind of setup. And I think I wouldn't do it justice. The key thing is you can get XAPI statements from a number of different areas. So e-learning, yes. From a face-to-face session, yes. But you can do it from anything as long as it follows that the active verb object structure. So you're generating this content, and then you're actually using that in some form. So I think before you get too heavily into the technicals of XAPI, I think the bigger question is what data, what metrics will you get that will actually help impact on the solution? So that's a bigger question, having that mindset, asking the right questions. And that's where design thinking can come in, to actually work out what data and what metrics will actually be most impactful. Where do you need to look for insights? Otherwise, data just by itself is just overwhelming. So you need to almost have that thinking piece, which I think people on the call will be great at. They just need to focus their attention on metrics. then you can work with people to actually work out how to get these XAPI statements, where to store them, and all that technical stuff, if that's not your bag. But the role you've got is to have that mindset piece about what metrics do we need and how can we capture that from different places in an effective way and feed it back to people at the moment of need that can impact on their behaviour, for example. So it's thinking more in terms of how can we use data to impact, I think is the bigger question. But yeah, look up Megan Torrance, look up Aaron Silver's probably a bit more technical. But yeah, Megan Torrance is probably one of the best ones in terms of just understanding XAPI.
All right, thank you so much. Jan asked another question here about any tips on how to drive these initiatives when everyone feels so time poor. In your experience, is appealing to individual learner as effective as getting management to drive it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be done on multiple levels.
Yeah.
I think it's to win management over. But also, I don't try to pose learning as a thing which is separate to work. I try to pose it as in you need to get your work done better and faster, and this is the way you're going to do it. So people are obviously too reactive and too busy and too overwhelmed to say, okay, now I'm going to sit down and do this 2 hours of this coaching conversation or this whatever. So you focus on performance because that's what people care about. And I'm not saying people don't care about learning, and people should care about learning, and people hassle me about that I'm not learning purist. But in reality, when people are busy and stressed, they're going to focus on getting the job done. And so you can pose learning as a way that they can get the job done more effectively. And then they'll get addicted to it and they'll just embed it as part of their workflow. That's one of my big messages is how can you embed learning into the workflow rather than feeling like people have got to choose either get this job done or I go and do some learning. That's not the what we almost want them to say, how can I nudge my behaviour and learn more effectively as I get this job done and get the job done better?
Yeah, I agree. I think speaking, it really is about relevance these days, isn't it? And speaking about how we are so time poor, I think we will conclude today's webinar and just remind people, Tash and a couple of people asked me about this, that yes, we will provide a copy of the webinar recording within 48 hours. As I said, if you do have a moment, we'd really appreciate your help by giving us feedback about your digital event experience by filling out the Redback report. The link is located in the document folder at the bottom right corner of your screen. I would like again to thank you, Arun Pradhan, for this, another great session on your take on where L&D is going and in terms of the skills that we need to develop to withstand that robot apocalypse, as you were mentioned, which is a bit alarming, but so highly relevant. I would also like to thank Redback Conferencing. Thank you so much. Redback is proud to be partnering with AITD to bring you our 2008 AITD webinar series. My name is Siobhan Sutherland-Rogers. It's been a complete pleasure. If you'd like any other information or further information about how to launch your own digital event, don't hesitate to get in touch with Redback. And of course, AITD, we always welcome feedback. And as I say, we've been part of the community since 1971. So it's really good to have such a great turnout today. Thank you, everyone. Happy Thursday, and see you at the next webinar event, or hear you from the next webinar event on the 27th of July with Lisa Elias, Data Analytics. Thank you so much. Bye now.